Welcome, Jeff Johnston, host of the Living Undeterred podcast, with my good friend Jill Cichowicz.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, it's easier to say than it is to spell.
Yes, it is. It's hard.
Hey, I really admire what you do, and I know our listeners and followers and watchers and people that really have fallen into my story are going to love what you're doing. And I had the honor and pleasure to have the Living Undeterred U.S. tour stop in Richmond and participate in your To End the Stigma event, which was awesome. And I think you and I have a lot of exciting things to talk about. And unfortunately, we'll talk about some things that could be difficult. So,
Right.
Jill, welcome to the show. And how's Richmond today?
Richmond's good. I mean, we've been talking. It's a busy day, as always. It's a beautiful day, so that's nice. But just jumping from appointment to appointment and being a mom and doing what I do on a day-to-day basis.
Like all of us,
Yeah.
That's the great thing about people can see how our resolve and kind of our focus on when things occur in our lives.
Yeah.
And everybody out there watching can relate. Most people are moms and dads, their sons and daughters, their neighbors, their brothers and sisters.
Right.
Yet sometimes, if not all the time, grief and trauma enter our lives at some point, whether it's abuse as a child or traumatic event in your teenage years or something, as awful as what happened to us with death entering our lives. But before we get too deep into all that, which is easy to do, let's talk a little bit about your purpose and kind of your passion and kind of what inspires you the most about what you do each day.
Yeah. So thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. And, I do think, I think we gravitate towards each other because we have similar stories, but no one's the same story, but yet it's all the same stories. The deeper I get into this, the more I talk to families that have lost loved ones to, substance use, addiction, mental health. I'm realizing the people that we've lost are all similar creatures, kind of kind and fragile and sweet and spirited and just, so I guess I should say how I started this. So I am the fifth child of a family of 5 kids and military parents, or my dad was military. My twin brother, Scott, and I say we're the babies because we still are the babies in the family. Scott told everyone that he was my older brother because he was 5 minutes older than me. He really loved to tell everybody that. Growing up, we just had an ideal, family. Like we would move around. My dad was a pilot in the Army. We're very strong Catholics, go to mass every Sunday, dinners every night. I had a stay-at-home mother. I mean, I think you think when someone battles something, they had some traumatic childhood or some terrible, home life. And honestly, we were kind of the envy of neighbors. We were the family that everyone just seemed put together and happy and had things in control when really it was anything but. And I think with Scott, he just beat to a different drum. He was just a little eccentric when we were younger, just a little more goofier than people, and attention span wasn't always there. And, but I think that I say he's the best of the 5 of us kids. I honestly believe he was the best out of the 5 of us with the biggest heart and just had such a wonderful passion for someone. He didn't like bullying. He always looked out for the underdog. He always wanted to care for someone that was, a little different. And I think that was probably his best qualities. He was kind of an ugly duckling, kind of a nerd growing up. And I tell everyone, he wore sweatsuits. He had the thick glasses, didn't brush his hair. And then in high school, he became really popular and attractive and played football and fell in love with this girl that was a foreign exchange student from Brazil. And they started kind of this hot affair, not affair, but
right.
High school romance, whatever you want to call it. I say they're like Romeo and Juliet, like star-crossed lovers. And my mom asked Scott to cool it. She thought it was too hot and heavy for him, that he was 17 and she was 15. And they got into a little bit of an argument. And then the next day she was coming over to speak with Scott because she was so upset. And she was killed in a car accident. And
oh man,
that's when
I
truly believe this is the trauma. Everyone, you talk to people, and there's a trauma that's triggering why people turn to, a substance of some sort.
Oh
And
yeah, yeah.
and this was being 17 years old, and he was very young, and
So she was
he did.
literally coming over to speak with him and hit
She
by a
was en
car.
route to our house, and I will tell you, the crazy thing is when she came to, America, she spoke no
Wow.
English. So there was a language barrier between the two of them, but it was like this chemistry that pulled the two of them together.
Mm-hmm.
And Scott never had girlfriends. He never dated, and it was funny. I met her at school that day, and she looked at me and she pointed out this guy that she liked. And naturally it was Scott. And then I go home that afternoon, and I'll never forget it. He said, "I'm in love. I met the woman I'm going to marry." And it was so
Hmm.
weird to be, so it was very traumatic for him. And
Wow.
he definitely should have gotten some counseling. He should have handled those feelings, but what he did was turn to smoking marijuana. That kind of
Hmm.
numbed the feeling. It kind of made him forget the pain he was in, and that's really what started his whole path of the
And
downward
drinking too.
spiral. Yes, yes, and and I don't condone it, because people smoke weed now, but high school people were smoking weed. They were drinking a little bit. It was nothing that was alarming or out of control back then. It was, he was still
Mm-hmm.
doing lots of sports. He was very athletic, did well in school. It wasn't like anything that was hindering him from graduating, high school, or stopping him from being, sports or anything.
But you could see a gradual decline of,
Yes.
desire, motivation,
Yes.
his appearance. They would say the traditional signs of either someone, on that suicide road or someone that's on suicide by substance abuse, which
Right.
is, and indirectly, a lot of people that die from substance use distress, as I like to say, or addiction, it's ultimately suicide by that means, which is longer and more destructive, but it still
Right.
ends in the same outcome,
It
you
is.
know?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, he did, he went to college for 2 years, and he decided, this isn't for me. This is for the birds. It's not for me. And I kind of wondered if the drug use was probably a way for him not to be able to finish that school, the degree. I don't know. And he decided to follow my other brother out to California, to live the good life. And I tell everyone, my other brother is a real estate mogul, does very well. And Scott kind of wanted a piece of the pie. Like, let me go out there and get
Hmm.
let me try it out. And he was really successful. He ran gyms, and he was really into working out, but he would play hard and he'd work hard, a little bit of both, go to
Oh
Vegas,
yeah. Yep.
gamble a lot. And anyone
Yep.
knows that if you are someone who has an addictive nature, LA and Vegas are probably not for you.
Right.
I think that lifestyle was not conducive for his addiction. I don't think he knew he was an addict at that time, but they talk about environment and behavior and the people you're running
Hmm.
with. And I think it was like the perfect storm brewing. You had the trauma as a child, you had the addictive DNA, and then you had the environment in which you live in. It was like the perfect storm brewing. It just was going to
Now, at
work.
this stage, were there family members that were trying to intervene, or was there anybody that pulled him aside, or as a family unit came together and maybe did an intervention? I mean, was he that bad that an intervention was needed, or was it more of, maybe it's a phase, maybe he'll outgrow
Yeah.
this, and maybe he'll
It was more where we said, "Oh, it's LA." That's what people do. We kind of made excuses.
right,
And also because, my husband was military, and we were
right,
traveling and PCSing everywhere in the country. And, he would deploy for a year and a half at a time. And I had young boys at home. So I spoke and texted with Scott every single day.
hmm,
What I didn't realize is the spiral he was going down. My other brother in California, Brett, he was starting to witness it. And, Brett, used to go out with him for a little bit and have some drinks and partying. And then he decided that he would stop, because a
hmm,
lot of people will tell you in LA, that lifestyle will eat you up. It will,
hmm,
it's very hard to maintain the work-life balance. But,
right,
and so Brett was always trying to offer him help. Brett would say he'd pay for it. He knew he had an issue, not to the level of really requiring a recovery or rehab of some sort at that time. It was really more just recreational, but still running a job and still, holding down his responsibilities.
Do you think Scott was aware that he was on this destructive path, or do you think he was just either being enabled maybe by a circle of friends that were with him, or do you think he was just naive?
I think, I always said, I don't think he knew he had, an addiction. My mom seems to think that he did know. And I will say we all enabled him. My mom and I were
Oh
probably,
yeah, I think we're all guilty of that. Yep,
yeah,
I would
yeah.
agree.
And I
I would
think
agree.
we made
In
excuses.
hindsight, we always realize it the most, though.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's probably what eats me up every single day is the guilt of the way I enabled him and the way I
Mm-hmm.
encouraged the behavior and kind of got him out of his, situations he would get in. But it
The missed
really,
opportunities, I like to say.
yeah. And like, he and I are twins and I'm over there paying some of his bills and I'm thinking he makes really good money. Why is he
Mm-hmm.
always broke? That's a telltale sign. I noticed he started spending less and less time with friends, more alone time. It got to
Mm-hmm.
a point where my other brother would not really kind of cut ties with him a little bit, didn't let him. My brother has 3 children, and Scott would come to the football games. He was very close to the kids, but he was starting to act erratic and a little bit out of
Yeah.
control. And my brother was like, either you get help or, you can't be around us. And so he kind of,
I don't blame your brother. I don't blame you because ultimately at the end of the day, I speak on as being a father,
right.
is I got to protect my other kids, and so I certainly understand having to make those decisions because I
Yeah.
look at my situation and it's like I drew a line in the sand many times with
Right.
both my son and my wife, but the outcome was still death, and that's where I struggle with is like maybe I drew the line too quickly, maybe I was too tough love, but then again, I had to take care of myself and take care of my other 2 boys, and then everybody else that's in my life as well.
Right, right. And that's the thing is I always thought Brett was being too harsh and the tough love thing I wasn't a fan of. And I hate when people say rock bottom. Let him hit rock bottom,
I
Jill. He's got to
I
hit rock
agree.
bottom. And I know a lot of
Yeah.
people will use those terms and maybe it works for their story or how they believe their story went down. Scott never hit rock bottom. And that's the thing is, he never made it to rock bottom because, you know, it took him over before he got to that point. And that's the thing that bothers me the most is what I would do is send him money. I would send him a Costco gift card because I was like, surely this would be for food and gas. Because he was always broke. He never had money. And he would kind of call my mom and I and be like, I'm going to be homeless or I don't have gas for my car. And of course,
Yeah.
we would do this Walmart to Walmart thing where I would send him money that way. And I feel really guilty now because, my husband was like, he needs to figure this out. You can't pay for him all the time. And so it was kind of a way of hiding it from my husband too, was sending him money Walmart to Walmart. And so he wouldn't know it was going to Scott.
Well, rock bottom, as was for Seth, Scott, my wife, was
Yeah.
death. And that's
Yes.
where some people don't understand is we say kind of just, I don't know, metaphorically, hey, you'll hit rock bottom. Like
Yeah.
rock bottom is some celestial experience where the clouds part and all of a sudden it's my epiphany moment,
Yeah. Like
and
the
that
light
may be in the
bulb goes
movies.
off.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
that may be in the movies as rock bottom, but for
Yeah.
many, many people, rock bottom is death. And with 110,000 overdoses last year, and 800 Americans die by suicide, alcohol, and overdose per day in the United States. Rock bottom for many people is death. And so I think as advocates, we need to say, well, let's catch them on the way to rock bottom. Let's
Yeah.
don't wait. Let's have a net there halfway in between.
Yeah.
And so we don't have the Scotts and the Seths and the Prudences and all the other advocates you and I meet, literally, Jill, every day. And it's, it's disheartening, it's frustrating, but it's also encouraging because then I meet the success stories. I meet the advocates, like Tim Ryan, who was incarcerated, who did heroin, who was saved by Narcan and all these things. And now he's a big advocate. And so,
Yeah.
I think sharing our story and making sure that we make the story relatable to maybe somebody that hasn't lost somebody yet, but
Right.
this train is coming. And if you're a parent with young kids, and I'm talking, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, you have to understand that this train is coming at you very quickly in the form of mental health.
Yes.
And I don't know what type of train it'll be, if it'll be alcohol or marijuana or, something else. But the train is like almost inevitable. And I think we need to get parents more aligned with what's going to happen and not tell them that you may be one of the lucky ones that dodge this train. And so that's kind of one of the things I'm really hyper focused on is this sounds terrible, Jill, but I see families at the park with 2 or 3 young kids and a dog, and they're playing catch, and I almost feel sorry for them. It's like they have no idea the
What's coming
impending
from?
doom coming around the corner. And I know not everyone is going to go through what you and I went through, and
No,
the majority aren't. But death doesn't have to be there to destroy a family. I
right.
mean, there are millions and millions of family where no death has occurred, but their lives are just destroyed and decimated,
Yeah,
and just so much pain and suffering and divorce and financial woes, and just those. I mean, the 6-year journey we went through with Seth, just the really tough times we had.
yeah,
That resonated. It affected my boys. It affected my relationships with other people. It affected my well being. And even to this day, I go back to those moments, and I just think to myself, like you said, I don't know if you and I have guilt, but we definitely have reasons to learn from what happened.
right.
Um, so as
You
you
want to
go through
help
your
others as a
advocacy,
result, right? Because you've learned the errors of your way. To like I said, it's my
right,
cross to bear now, and I've taken it on. But it's also like I'm trying to, and you probably feel the same way. Spare the family next to me. Like, listen to what I'm
right,
saying. Don't become us. Even though people think, "Oh, you guys are great in your advocacy work. You're doing wonderful things." I would much rather not have done this. I was fine being a
yeah.
military wife and a stay-at-home mom and room mom
I
and
was fine
carpool.
being a financial advisor for
Right.
32
I was
years.
okay doing
Yeah,
those things. I didn't know, I didn't
yep,
ask for it, but I feel it's my responsibility and I feel like it's a purpose and someone is pushing this train along to keep it going to help others because you just know you're right. You do look at families and you're like, it's out there, it's coming,
I
you just want
know.
them to be
And I
ready.
never felt that way. I used to look at families and feel
I
like, I remember my kids were little and how blissful and how innocent and full of
know.
glee they are. And they still are, yet there's this something going on with that
That
next
dark
level
cloud
of
right behind them at all times. Yeah,
yeah. And it's like it sucks. It doesn't have to be this way, but
it doesn't.
you and I and all the other thousands of people we've met that have been touched by this issue are trying to turn the lens on less about Scott and Seth and me and you, but more about you. I was just making a comment today on LinkedIn. I made a post a couple days ago, and it's the largest impression post I've ever had in social media. It's almost 30,000 impressions. And
Wow.
it wasn't, yeah, but Jill, the intent of it was just, it was Seth's birthday.
Yes.
And I just thought, well, instead of putting a picture of Seth and some poem or some music and just, I don't want to be Debbie Downer, but it's like, I wanted to take Seth's birthday and say, you know what, in honor of Seth, why don't you go out and do something for the ones you've lost in your lives? And so I've got this called the 9 Days of Seth between his birthday and his date of death. And I posted it like I have many other posts, and it went completely, I don't know, viral's 27,000 impressions, but for me,
That's a
in
lot.
my world, it is.
That's a lot.
For some famous people, that's probably a poor post, but for me, that was impactful. And
Yeah.
I realized after I started looking at the comments and all the direct messages I got that this wasn't about Seth.
Yeah.
This was about the way that it was presented to
Yeah.
inspire people to use what I went through to make an impact on their life. And that was, that was intentional. I know you feel the same way, but the
Yeah.
pity and sympathy ship sailed a long time ago.
Yes. Oh,
Um,
yes.
I know you well, and you're not looking for that.
No.
I'll
No.
take I love you and our condolences, and I'll take all that. That's fine. People pray for me. That's great.
Yeah.
But I'd rather have someone say, how can I help?
Yeah. What can I
Right.
do? Can I join
And
forces?
not you, but how can I help other people in my community? How can I? And
Yeah.
so let's talk about to end the stigma. Let's talk about your an evening. What's it called? An evening for Scott or evening
A
with
night
Scott
for
or
Scott. A night for
a night
Scott.
for Scott.
Mhm.
Talk about that. Talk about your golf outing. I mean, you're killing it. You're doing an amazing amount of work. And like I said, I'm very grateful that I was able to hook up with you guys when we
Yeah.
came out on a tour.
Yeah.
Certainly plan on helping you out with future projects, and I'm going to lean on you to help us on some of ours as well.
Of course, of course. So, but back to the Scott, and what happened is, he got addicted to OxyContin, and after a
Mm.
back injury at his job, workers' compensation put him on it. He was taking it every single day until he was overprescribed, and Costco pharmacist says, hey man, you've got like 90 pills, 4 scripts a week. What are you doing? And just yanks it. And so that's when Scott gets a pill from a friend. And the worst part is he says this looks fake. He attaches an article about this pill looking fake to this friend. And I say it's a friend. It was a drug dealer. It's not a friend. And the guy was like, people say it works. And that's all it took, because Scott was in severe withdrawal, that he took that pill.
Yeah, I mean,
even his better judgment,
I don't blame him.
No, don't do this. Don't do this.
It's easy for us to sit there and say, well, why didn't Scott just say no? Well, has anyone been in the grips of withdrawals and dope sick? And
I have never. So no, I haven't either.
I've never done drugs, but I've been an alcoholic for a long time. Yeah. I know what it's like to sit there at night wanting to have a drink.
Yeah.
Or going to a casino. I was a compulsive gambler for 20 something years. I know what it's like to literally sweat walking into a casino.
Yeah.
Or looking through the sports websites on a Tuesday night looking for something to bet on.
Yeah.
Some sport I don't even follow. I just needed the action. I needed the dopamine hit.
God had like a book.
I can get that.
It's like that endorphin release,
So let's talk, if you don't mind, about the day that he passed and kind of how that transpired and what happened.
Yeah, because, it's weird. I think when I tell people, are always shocked, because I think, in our minds, we hear overdose. We're like, oh, it's a guy who, just shot up and laid down and went to sleep. And I'm like, there's several different ways of overdosing. There's not one way. There's not one way, So yes, we have Scott's cell phone. We have the play-by-play of exactly what happened. So he gets this pill from a friend, attaches the article, does that.
And what year was this again, Jill? What
2017,
year?
February of 2017.
Okay, that paints the picture there. Okay.
Right, because you weren't hearing about the fentanyl, the one pill kills,
right,
things like that. That was not on anyone's radar. I mean,
no one knew what fentanyl was.
No. So he was kind of spearheaded this whole thing with, when now we hear about it nonstop. And I think if he'd known about it or even heard about it back then, maybe he could have questioned it more. But you and I both know, when you hear about withdrawals, like he would tell my mom that withdrawal would be so bad that he would blow his brains out if he didn't think he'd go to hell. That's what he used to tell my mother.
Wow.
And because he was a devout Catholic, close to God, he felt, that would happen. And I'm like, that's why we were like, this is a problem, that we have a problem. So he goes into Starbucks. He had taken this pill, what he thought was an Oxycontin. He gets in line to get a cup of coffee. He talks to my mother briefly, and she said he sounded really low, but it's because, she thought he was in line at Starbucks. And then he walks out. It's an outdoor shopping center. So there's a Trader Joe's there. He's in Starbucks. There's a restaurant. People are dining outside, eating dinner. It's like 6:45, And so he's parked right up front. He walks to his car. He opens the door. He sets the cup of coffee on the top of his car, and he drops to one knee. So this is all within minutes. This is not a very long span of when he took that pill. And for 20 minutes, he is kneeling on the curb at Starbucks and kneeling. And so everybody's just watching him. They're not helping him. They're not calling 911. And this is the part that chokes me up the most, because being devout, and I'm sure, he probably was praying. He probably was asking God, in my mind, his last moments really bother me, because I hope that he passed out really fast. Because I was like, was he scared? Did he just spoken to my mom? Did he wish he was, there's so many things that run through your head. But then after 20 minutes, a guy comes over, because he's doing that death rattle. I don't know the formal name, but it sounds like there's and he taps on him. He goes, hey man, are you okay? And Scott falls over, and he had suffocated and died from fentanyl toxicity. So then everybody calls 911, and then the ambulance comes and does Narcan and all that. And by this point, he'd been without oxygen for too long. And so he was.
So they did Narcan back in 2017. They had Narcan.
Well, they did that. I don't know if it was Narcan. This was like the shot they do in the vein in the neck. So I don't know exactly how it was administered.
Because most police officers weren't carrying that.
This was the ambulance. So this is the, the ambulance drivers. Yeah, the police. So they both came on site responding to the 911. And apparently the ambulance got him to the hospital really quickly. But the worst part is 2 days pass and no one is notified. No one, my family. Scott had a vehicle. He had a wallet. He had a phone. He was dressed pretty nice. Like nobody attempted to call anybody to claim him. So my mother in Virginia is calling everywhere, sending his picture to every Starbucks in that area and looking for her son. And so we didn't find out for 2 days. Yeah.
So
So, I think because the way he died, he was treated like a junkie, just put a tag on his toe and just, he was
yeah.
worthless, in his mind when realized there's a family that's, really hurting.
How's the rest of the family and mom and dad and everybody doing?
Everybody handles grief in their own way, as you and I both know. I
Right.
handle it through doing advocacy work and talking about his story as much as we can, saying his
You're
name.
just kicking it right in the face. That's what you're doing.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
because for 6 months
You have
after he
to.
died, I went down this really weird place. And I guess you'd call it
Yep.
depression now, but I
Yep.
could not look at anyone. I couldn't let anyone touch me. I didn't want my children near me. I thought I was going to die. I didn't want to
Now,
live. I didn't.
did you yourself, are you in recovery? Did you ever have personal issues with? Okay.
No,
Okay.
no, which is weird being twins. And
Yeah.
actually, I'm
Well, it
actually
shows
right
it's not
now.
always genetic. I mean, it shows
No.
it's not always genetic.
Yeah, I mean, even if I can barely tolerate a Percocet from anything, like, I'll pass out on a plate of food. I'm very sensitive to medicine. Can't take
Hmm.
Benadryl. I'm really, really funny with it. So, but yeah, so after this happened, I remember we had his funeral 6 months after he died. We had to bring his ashes home from California. And I woke up the next day and was like, this is not the end. This is not where his story ends. If it happens to my family, it's happening to everyone. We got to do
Mm-hmm.
something. We got to talk about it. We got to
Mm-hmm.
raise money or funds for a scholarship. We've got to get the community involved. It just can't happen like this.
So started your journey of advocacy. As I like to say, Joe, purpose becomes passion when it gets personal.
Yes.
That's on the back of all my shirts, and every single person I've met in this industry, which I hate that word, but the mental health space,
Yeah.
has a lived experience story, whether it's their own, like heroin addiction or something
Yeah.
happened, or it's somebody happened in their family.
Right.
It's 100%, 100%. I don't know of a passionate advocate in this space that doesn't have some personal attachment to the
Right.
insidious nature of addiction and substance distress. Notice I don't say disorder anymore. I'm trying to get that word out of my vocabulary. I say attention deficit and I stop there.
Yeah.
I just think, I don't want to get off on a completely different tangent, but since it's my show, maybe we can. But about labels and stigmas, it's like
Yes.
I get so
Yeah.
frustrated. I get so frustrated with the simple things that we could start to alleviate. And the simple things we can control is our terminology and how we
Yes.
label things. And it's like attention deficit. Why I mean, especially when we attach it to kids, it's like, why can't we just leave it at attention deficit? Why can't we just stop right there? I mean, why does it have to be a disorder? Well, obviously, you know the answer, Jill.
Yes.
It's a diagnosis. It can be filed for insurance potentially to have. And
We
so
have
that's
to
the game
label
that
it
we
as
play.
such. Yeah. Right.
And which is just BS, because if you're 12 and you're told you have attention deficit, and it can be very, very beneficial to you the rest of your life if harnessed correctly, i.e., my dad to me,
Right.
or you have attention deficit disorder, and unless you take this pill, you're going to eat your
Yes.
friends at midnight because you're going to turn into a werewolf,
Right.
which is what Seth was told. Why? Why the hell don't we see this as a society? And you know what? So if a doctor comes to my wife and I and says, your son has attention deficit disorder, why are we obligated to actually even believe him?
Right.
And B, why can't we just say, no, doctor, he has attention deficit.
Yeah.
That's what he has.
Because we need to medicate them. We have to fix them. They're wrong. We have to fix them. And it's funny.
We got to fix this. We have to fix this problem.
We do. And we just had
We
this
do.
strategic planning meeting with my board and my consultant. And we were talking about language. And this is one thing we actually talked about, that substance use disorder. It's almost like we want to put it in this pretty little package and use that word because that's the way of like watering down the real raw addiction. Like we were talking about language and how important language is in identifying this and helping people. It's funny. We had just a full on like.
I'll give you a short example I use when I do my talks. I had a lady reach out on Facebook one time and she said, "Hey Jeff, I follow your story and admire what you're doing. And I want to know if I could get some help." And first of all, I'm not a doctor. I'm just a dad from Iowa. I don't have any clinical background. I have lots of lived experiences, but I don't have any scientific or medical or physiological background in this area. So she said, my daughter died and I have survivor's guilt to the point where I think I should have joined her. So I didn't get to, I don't know how, whatever she even died of. I didn't get that far. And
Right.
she said, what would you say to me to help me move on from, quote, survivor's guilt? So I thought, wow, that's a tough one. Again, I'm not a therapist. And I made it clear when I responded that I wasn't. But I said, let's try this. This is free. It's non-medical. I'm not going to prescribe anything to you. No therapist. And it's something you can do immediately. And I said, let's take the word guilt and let's replace it with the word opportunities. So now instead of survivor guilt, you have survivor opportunities. Try that for a week and then let me know. That's simple. Instead of saying survivor's guilt, which now is this weighted baggage of this torturous concept of why did this happen to her? Why shouldn't I be with her? What could I have done? It's just that stupid word guilt that somebody put in her head, because it wasn't in her head till somebody told her she had survivor's guilt, or she read it somewhere.
Right.
So somebody put it in there, and just as fast as it went in, it can be taken out.
I like
and
that.
So she did that for a week.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so why can't all this be looked at as opportunistic? Even death, even addiction, even the mental health crisis, depression, anxiety. Why can't we just, I guess here's my argument, Jill. If what we were doing was working, we wouldn't need to play tricks in our head and do these games that we can do to change it. We would just keep doing what we're doing, and 800 a day would go to 700, would go to 600, would go to 500. Right. We'd have addiction and substance use distress eradicated. It ain't working. None of this is working. And the numbers across the board, unless you really want to get nitpick and find, 17-year-old African-American males suicide rates dropped 2%. Okay, great. I'll give you that. Maybe I just made that up, by the way, but it's like, we really have to nitpick.
Great. How'd you know that?
I just made is it true? I just made it up.
I know,
but the reality is,
it good.
Well, the reality is that we have to work really hard to find the good news in all this, because most of it's not good news.
Heroin overdoses are down because the opioid crisis is up, but heroin came down. We're like, oh, okay.
Well, I saw a stat. Well, because of what happened, prescription opioids are down 50%. And I said, congratulations, deaths are up 100%.
100%, right.
Because you don't understand, when you stop giving, like happened to your brother, you stop giving him oxy for pain that's legitimate pain, and something he was prescribed that he shouldn't have been prescribed because he was told it was non-addictive, and you take that away from him, where the hell do you think he's going to go? He's going to go to the street. That's exactly what Scott did. I don't blame him for anything that he did.
I don't either. And I will tell you, I had this troll.
I'd have done the same thing.
Yeah. I had this guy email me recently. The trolls come for you when, you're starting to get a little bit of attention. And he said,
bring it on, trolls.
I know. And I get all upset. And I'm like, I'm so nice. Why do you do this? And the guy said to me, you do not give any responsibility to your brother for his own death.
Of course you do. Of course you do.
Right. And I was like, I don't know where that relevance or why you're saying that to me. I don't know who you are, but I know he had some responsibility. And some people say, oh, you paint him as a saint. I don't paint him as a saint. Nope. I remember him in the way that he used to be, and he was before the addiction took him over. But that's the story I have to tell, right?
No, I get you. I certainly feel you, because I haven't had too many trolls, but when I have made a comment on somebody's post that was kind of confrontational, especially recently with harm reduction and things like that, where you have a pretty solid line in the sand. Right. Some people will take some pot shots and stuff, but I've kind of, unless they've lost somebody, my credibility, they're not credible to me unless they can walk in the shoes, even one shoe. Yeah. Maybe you lost a mom, a dad, brother, sister. It doesn't have to be a son or daughter or your wife, just somebody you've lost in your immediate family circle to the grips of mental health. And then I give you a little more credibility. But, if you have a PhD, an MD and all this stuff, but you're happily married, all your kids are alive, and you've lost nobody, then I have a hard time. Even if you're smarter than me, understanding that you think you understand grief and trauma and all this stuff when you haven't lived it.
Experience speaks volumes. You can look at a textbook and then you can look at real life. And that's what I say. Like, some people say, well, you do public speaking, you do this, you don't have a background or degree in it. I'm like, I lived
Yeah,
it
you
for
do.
20 years.
In life, in
Yeah.
life, you do.
I'm starting to become an expert, buddy, but no. But I agree. And so, and that's how this all started is after he died, I said, I want to start something, to keep his legacy. I want to help others that can't afford services. And I want to raise awareness on the disease because I was ignorant. I will tell you firsthand, I was judgy to people that were battling drugs. It's those
I
people.
was too.
I really
I
was.
was too.
I had fully
My son
admitted.
and my wife, I was judgmental to them.
Yeah. And I kept saying, why can't you just pull your shit together? Sorry, I don't know if I can say that.
Right.
But, why
No,
can't
you
you
can.
just go to work? Like I kept thinking Scott just wanted to party and didn't want to grow up and had the Peter Pan
Yeah.
syndrome. And here I am with a wife and kids and my husband's at war all the time. And how are we twins? You're living in LA and
Right.
a good life and won't go to work. And here I am holding the fort down. Like it felt very not fair in my world to see like what was going on with him when I didn't really get it. I didn't get it.
And the frustration, and I know you'd agree with this, was where do you go? Who do you call? What's
right?
It's like, as a dad, I'm like, okay, my son is having, and I watched, my older two brothers had some experimentation with drugs and alcohol, my older two brothers, but they're still alive. They're both of them have changed the way they were doing that. So I kind of thought, well, maybe Seth is going down that road. And, I drank beer occasionally with him on a fishing trip in Minnesota, got drunk with him a few nights up there. He was like 17.
Yeah.
And I don't regret that. I mean, that's, I made a decision at that point. I thought it was a rite of passage that you have a beer with your dad, like, Russ did in Vacation with Chevy Chase,
Yeah.
And honest to God, that's how I kind of thought, but I didn't realize, the intensity of what his drinking was like. And when he got drunk up there and we were fishing and he got up the next morning and we made breakfast and joked about it, I guess I didn't realize that's not what I should have been doing. However, I learned from that. Right. And it's not a rite of passage. Getting drunk with your children is not a rite of passage. Mm-hmm. And you're the parent. You're not the best friend. And if I had it over again, which if there is a reincarnation or an afterlife, and I get a chance to live another life, then hopefully I can remember those moments. But the reality is, I can't go back. No. I can't go back and relive those moments. I have to just respect the fact that I made the best decision at that time of my life when I was an alcoholic as well. Now my lens is completely changed. And if Seth and I, and even my wife, if she was back, I would certainly do things differently. Right. But I don't know if I would do the same things differently if I was given the same opportunities at the same time in my life again. I probably wouldn't. I'd probably just repeat the same mistake.
I say the same thing. I think I'd probably do it the same way, even though, I mean, it's just the way it is. Yeah. No, I totally agree with that too. And every, my mom will come up and say, I think I didn't love him enough as a baby when he would cry. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm like, first of all, I have the mother, you've met my mom, the mother of all mothers that had 5 kids. That is, even to this day, the most extraordinary mother you've ever met. In love.
I just want to hug her right now for making that comment because it tears my heart out. Yeah.
She's like, maybe when he was crying, maybe when I was rocking him,
right.
It was too hard. Maybe I did something to brain. I'm like, Mom, you told him an addict. Like,
right.
It's that parents thing. And, she just feels responsible for it. And, I said, Mom, if anyone got the shaft, it's me. I'm the 5th kid. I just went under the radar, just, doing my own thing at all times. But yeah, so, after his passing, that's what it was. It was like, my sister had just had a baby 3 weeks before Scott died, Luca, and Luca will never know Scott. And I hated the idea that my kids were 5 and 8, and Scott had just come home for Christmas, thank goodness, and spent some time with my kids and stayed with me for a few days. California, we only saw him once a year, even though we talked all the time. My kids were so young, and I couldn't handle the fact that they thought their uncle was just a druggie that died from drugs. Like Scott was the guy that came to every duty station we were at. Every deployment, he would come to me because he thought I was scared to sleep alone at night. And he wanted to come and help me out with my kids and make sure I was okay. Like, he's that guy that if you looked at me sideways, he would come tell you, don't look at my sister that way. You respect my sister. Like, he was so good. He was so good. And I couldn't, and he worked for homeless shelters, and he did so much, like, devoting his time to others. I hate it that's all you would remember is he died from a drug overdose. I could not allow that to be his legacy, and I won't.
Let me ask you this. I'll ask you this question.
Yeah.
I know how I answer it, and I always like to see other people's perspective, but Do you feel as if he's still alive?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
of course.
Yes.
I've got the same feeling with Seth, and that
Mhm.
was one of the actual dynamics that helped me
Yes.
continuing talking about Scott
Hmm.
is as if he's still alive
Yeah.
works for you and me. But there are some people, like with my wife, it was the opposite. And I ran into very difficult ways to deal with that as a husband
Yeah.
because I wanted to honor Seth by writing a book, doing a podcast, which I've done all these things when my wife was still alive. I even bought the RV for the tour when she was still alive, although I'd never had a chance to tell her about the tour. I
Yeah.
was nervous, to be honest with you, because I knew she wasn't. And I'm not trying to, anyone listening to this, please don't go, well, you shouldn't throw your wife. Well, you know what?
No.
First of all, it's my wife. She was my wife, not it, but she was my wife. I love her immensely, still love her,
Yeah.
miss her immensely. I feel I have a right to talk about her. And plus, who else is going to talk about her?
It's your
Nobody is.
story. You know, it's your.
So every time that I have an opportunity to talk about her, I want to because I
Yeah.
don't want her to die. I don't want Seth to die. I don't want Scott to die.
No.
So there's a part of me that thinks in my heart that, you know what, by continuing talking about Prudence and Seth, I keep them alive. I keep them alive. And again, I think for Jeff Johnston and for Jill Cichowicz, these are therapeutic ways. If you're listening to this right now and your therapeutic way is to not talk about your deceased child, then I respect that as well. But then replace that void and that gap with something constructive,
Right. No, and they
right?
have that quote. What do they say? A man's not truly dead if you never, when the last time you say his name or whatever. I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah.
Say that about
Yeah.
Scott all the time. The work we do, we get to say their names all the time. Every one of my
Oh,
events
yeah.
will have Scott's name in it. We're currently working on an education program, and I've got a team, and I'm trying to bridge the gap and talk to some of the students. Chesterfield County has a recovery high school that they opened this year, and there's
There's
17.
one down in Florida too that I just had. I had Tina Miller on my podcast. She runs Victory High School.
Yeah,
It's a
so.
recovery high school. It's
And I
amazing.
want to work more with the schools and get some sort of, I don't know, I'm talking about like a coping corner or something with Scott's coping, something with Scott. Everything I do, I mean, the nonprofit, I wanted Scott's name in it. And my consultant and I talked at length, and she said, you do a night for Scott. She's like, but if you make that your nonprofit's name, nobody will know how to find you. You've got to put something with stigma or addiction or something where if someone's looking for a keyword in a search, they'll find you. And even though I hated taking Scott's name out of the nonprofit name, everybody knows all of our events have Scott's name. Fairways for Scott golf tournament. Everything's
Yeah.
got Scott's name in it. Yeah. That's my
I
way of
went through
keeping
that
it
as well. I went through that as well, Joe, because I'm pretty convinced that raising awareness is a dead horse. The ship has sailed. It's
Yeah.
not working.
Yeah.
Look at fentanyl, for example. Right now, if I polled the average American, have you ever heard of fentanyl? Yes and no. It's going to be 90% yes.
Yeah.
5 years ago, it was zero, but deaths are up, 100%. So knowing more about fentanyl seems to be not working. Knowing
Right.
more about these things isn't working. What we have to do is bring attention to these issues. And the reason why this is a different psychological method, raising awareness is in your face. So if my RV had a picture of Seth on it or a
Right.
picture of Prudence, and I drove around the United States, that's like in your face. That's aggressive. It's, and people do it. They'll pay money and buy a billboard and put their son's face up there.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
not criticizing those people. I'm not criticizing those people. I'm just saying for Jeff Johnston, in my little bubble of advocacy, that doesn't work for me.
Right.
I would feel very uncomfortable driving around with a billboard with my son's face on it. Because I think that would be just a little, I think I can get the same point across, if not more, by bringing people in, by luring them into my story, by making it relatable to their story.
Right.
So the success of Living Undeterred, the success of all of our projects hasn't been with me, directly pushing Seth's face out there, but indirectly bringing people in. And once they're into the story, Living Undeterred, what's it all about? Wham! Then I'm all over them, and I can tell them all about it.
Right.
And I think to end the stigma, what you were doing was the same way. You get people to say, well, what's to end the stigma about?
Right.
If someone says a night, like let's say you have an event and it's something about Seth. Well, they already know.
Right.
It's like it's not really an inquisitive name that's going to get them to ask questions. Well, something happened, a car accident, cancer, somehow his son died, and they'll leave it at that. But if I have a name that's intriguing, and then we can bring them in that way. I think, am I tricking people? Absolutely not. I'm not convinced raising awareness works. And when I get interviewed now about, well, Jeff, I appreciate you raising. No, I'm not. I'm bringing attention to these issues.
Yes, I agree. You're right, because we've been fighting and raising awareness and working
It's not
hard.
working.
And yeah, no, you're totally right. And it's funny, we kind of updated our mission statement for End the Stigma, and we talked about alleviating barriers. And everybody says, "Well, what does that mean?" I said, and I've talked about it at length with my team. I said it's a doorknob that opens the conversation to so much more.
Right.
What
Right.
are there's a lot of barriers. There's a lot of stigmas going around, and there's a lot of shame and guilt and people feeling like they're moral failings when they're not. So, we just got to do better at what we're doing. I totally agree on that.
So let's talk about one angle of this issue with mental health, because there's kind of two roads we can go down.
Right.
I want your thoughts on your thoughts. How's that? So one is, and I talk about this a lot. So if you watch my podcast, this is a kind of a rhetorical question, but I kind of like to get your thoughts on this. One thought is, when Seth died, I was angry. I was an angry dad from the Midwest. I wanted to go down to the Mexican drug cartels and be Rambo. I mean, literally, I was that mad.
Yeah.
I wanted to build a 4-mile wall across Mexico to keep out all the drugs coming across. I wanted to go to China and get them to stop selling, fentanyl, which I'll talk a little bit about. They really aren't. They're selling the chemicals to make fentanyl.
Right.
That's another naive. I went down that supply side road where it's like, okay, we got to throw drug dealers in jail. We got to do this. Every drug has to be illegal. Boom. And all of a sudden I thought to myself, that's so reactionary.
Right.
It's so human. It's so normal to want to go out and just be very aggressive on this. And I thought, again, I'm not sure if that's where I want to spend the rest. I'm 56 years old. I got, 40 years of really good focus on this. Mm-hmm. That gets me to 96. Maybe I'll slow down by 96.
Maybe not.
But so the supply side, but then I started getting active, and Jill, everybody's going down that road. Everybody.
Right.
Every mom on Facebook's mad about fentanyl. Everybody's mad. And I certainly get that. But I'm talking about me, where I want to spend my time. And then I thought, okay, what's the one thing we're missing here as a society? We're missing the kids. We're missing the demand. We're missing why these kids are making the choices that they're making now. Granted, even since I came up with this thought, the goalposts have shifted mid-game, in that kids now are dying that aren't addicts. They're not addicted. Right. They're just buying Percocet on Snapchat at 13 and dying. So hear me. I understand that. That's not a demand issue. That's just, that's literally murder at that point. But so going back to the majority of kids that die by drug, alcohol, and even suicide, and I think NAMI has a statistic that 50% of all mental illness is started or initiated by the age 14. Yeah. So 50% of all mental illness by adults was started by the age 14. So if we know that half of our society, that their mental health problems started 14 and maybe a little bit before, but we spend like 10% of our resources, our energy, our focus, our advocacy, because all we're doing is building more rehab facilities, more recovery centers, handing out Narcan. We're doing all these, going after the drug cart. We're doing all these supply side things, which I think we have to have. And there's a lot of people doing that. It just wasn't for me.
Rallying at the Capitol in front of the Chinese embassy. And
I get it. But
right.
But I tell my boys right now, since I've never done drugs, I said, marijuana could be free on every street corner in the United States. I'm still not doing it. At least that type of drug. Now psychedelics is a whole different deal. I did a podcast on that. That's a whole different road for mental health that I'm talking about. But going back to my question, I wanted to ask you, which is turning into a very long statement. What's your thoughts on that dynamic between, where does Jill want to spend her advocacy on the supply side, or we think we're missing something on the demand side, understanding human behavior?
So I feel like I feel passionate about both. Let me just say that. But as far as where I feel I want my organization and my mission going, I feel a passion to adolescents, with younger adults and younger children. I feel like we're failing them in their earlier years. So then later on, they're developing, or they're not understanding, or they're turning to things that they shouldn't have. So with what I'm planning is like the education program, getting into schools, trying to do early education prevention so they never get on that path and they never go down that
Right.
road. And I want to get to the root of the trauma, the root of what's hurting them that they initially turned this way. So like, I know it's such a broad thing to say, oh, let's stop, let's raise awareness, which we've discussed. We don't want to raise awareness, but
Right.
I feel with me and with because my organization is not recovery or rehab. To End the Stigma
Right.
is about what the name says, ending the
Yeah.
stigma and shame that people are feeling to normalize the need for help. What is that stigma?
Right.
Could be anything. We're happen to be talking about substance use because that's the focus that we're doing. But so ours is really more, I felt like if we had gotten to Scott with that trauma when his girlfriend was killed, that he initially went to marijuana.
Yeah.
If we had gotten to him sooner and addressed it and said, hey, your feelings are normal. You're allowed to have these feelings. What are your coping skills? So for me, it's about trauma, coping skills, allowing a safe space and trying to get to these children before they go on Snapchat. And, even my son, he's got homecoming this weekend. He's 14. And I'm like, hey, Carter, I want to talk to you. There's an after party. And even my husband was like, oh, he's not getting into that, Jill.
Yeah.
Really?
Well, now you don't have to get into it. You just have to make one mistake.
What? And that's what I tell
Right.
him. You and I both know the whole One Pill Kills campaign.
Right.
I'm on that Can You See Me Now group on Facebook. I'm talking to parents, their kids are gaming in a basement and taking a pill while they're playing, their PS5 and dying in their rocking chair. One pill.
Wow.
So that is where I feel my focus and our organization's mission is going today. Will I elaborate and grow later on? Probably, but I feel like I've got to focus on one strong, side of
100% agree.
And then,
because Jill, then our passion gets watered down if we're trying to save everybody on every spectrum of mental health, substance use distress, and addiction. And I'll support. I will certainly do what I can to get those moms and dads that want fentanyl to be a weapon of mass destruction, and they're kind of going down that road. They're betting, they're all their passion on that one thing, and that's right. I'll support them as best I can.
Right.
But even if fentanyl was a weapon of mass destruction, it's just like taking opioid prescriptions and taking them down to 50%. If we get all the fentanyl off the street, it's naive to think that those that are looking for pain solutions aren't going to go somewhere else. And I just like, that's right. I don't want to get in arguments with these people that have already got this invested time and money and energy in this fentanyl weapon of mass destruction objective. And again, but it's like, okay, let's say you win. Do you think all the addicts out there that are in pain or are going to go through dope sick or go through the tremendous painful withdrawals of not having their drug of choice, which could be heroin or maybe fentanyl? I mean, before people were dying of fentanyl, there were addicts that were using fentanyl in their drugs. It just wasn't as strong as what's out there today, and wasn't being put in as much, apparently.
And actually, when there's a drug dealer that has someone die from fentanyl, and actually they get more customers as a result of it because they know they've got the strong stuff, which is mind-blowing to me that that's true. Yeah.
I was talking to Tim today, Tim Ryan, which I'll have him on shortly. And he was saying, when his son died, Nick, of overdose, Tim was called down to the police station, and they had Nick's girlfriend and two friends in the room with the glass up. They couldn't see Tim.
Yeah.
And they said, your son's heroin, or I think it was heroin, I don't want to misquote, but his son died from an overdose.
Right.
Your son purchased the drugs from either the girlfriend or the two friends. We're going to arrest them. And Tim said, no, you're not. Tim said, we're going to get him help. And that shift right there is what we need more of. And what we want to do is we want to incarcerate these people. And I understand the impulse. I mean, if you got me Seth's drug dealer and sat down in front of him and I had a chance to incarcerate him, man, it'd be hard not to death penalty that guy or gal. It'd be very difficult for me not to.
Exactly.
But part of me wants to believe that if we really want to fix this, everybody in this circle of addiction needs to have the services to be helped. And again, it's hard to say that to someone who's lost someone, the anger that's there. But for Tim to say that at that moment, I mean, that was like the same day.
Wow. That's
my
strong.
admiration grew. Yeah, it is. That's very strong. And
Right.
Tim knows that maybe this situation is the sacrificial lamb to make a bigger impact on changing everything.
It's funny you just use that term. I think my mother says that about Scott all the time. He was the sacrificial lamb that got, me and my family and friends and team to start wanting to make the change and start opening the dialogue because we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to say it. It's nasty. We don't want to say how he died. We don't want to talk about addiction. It's ugly. But you know what's more uncomfortable is talking about someone's funeral. And that's what I say every
Right.
time. It's not a comfortable conversation, but letting them die isn't either. And so we've got to open the dialogue. We've got to say it. And honestly, if I hadn't lost my twin brother, I wouldn't be in this arena. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing because, like you
I
said,
wouldn't either.
personal.
No.
When it hits your home, you look at the world a little bit different. You don't judge them anymore, and you look at and you say, you know what, it came to my backyard, so this is a little bit different now. And those ones that are still judging, it hits them, and then they start calling you, asking for help, and you don't want it to, but it is. It's like you said, it's like the Grim Reaper. He's like walking down your
Mm-hmm.
street. What house is he going to hit? You don't know, but you just want to keep talking to avoid it. That's all we can do, and help others. But like you said about, I don't know, with the Sheriff Leonard, with the HARP program in Chesterfield County, he fully believes in rehabilitating them while they're incarcerated because it's a disease that they need to be well
Mm-hmm.
of, because they're committing crimes based on, drug use that they're using. And so I firmly believe in rehabilitating them because I do think we need to get them well. Locking them up for 20 years isn't getting them well. It's locking them
Yeah,
up.
we look at it as a moral failing from
We
society's
do.
perspective and not as a disease or an addiction. And it's just like, oh, you should have just not went down that road, or maybe, like your brother thought about going to hell. I mean, that
Yeah.
morality issue comes in where people really are thinking that there are people like myself that I
Yeah.
made the choice not to do drugs. I made the choice to quit drinking. I made the choice to quit gambling. I'm me. That's all I can speak for. I can't say everybody else has the ability to do that.
Every
Believe it or not,
individual.
a lot do. A
Yeah.
lot of people quit cold turkey.
Yeah.
They don't get enough credit. They don't get enough credit because the assumption is that that's rare. But actually, if you look at the statistics, a lot of people walk away from alcohol and all these things quite easily. They're not tortured every day. I don't go to meetings.
Yeah.
I've figured out ways to kind of trick my own brain to do things each day. I have 2 hours of self-care a day, Jill. I don't miss it. I don't miss it. 2 hours a day, self-care. I've
Right.
blocked off. And to me, it saves my life. And so in that 2 hours, I'm pretty much free to do what I want. Sometimes it's an hour in the morning, hour at night, but I have 2 hours a day of self-care. And for me, it's typically meditation, running on my elliptical, doing something, either reading a book on these topics or something about self-care. But I make sure I do my 2 hours a day. It's just part of my day. And I head off a lot of these problems by being proactive like that. And again, I'm not anything special. I've just kind of found
I think
ways
you
and I
are.
prioritize. Well, I
I think you
prioritize
are.
well, I guess, in regards. I prioritize well in regards to I want to live. I want to see Brighton get older. I want to see Brighton get married. I want to see Seth's daughter have kids. I want to be that great grandpa. I want to see
Yeah.
Roman marry his boyfriend. I want to see Ian marry his girlfriend. I want to see my dad's 90. I want to see him live to be 100. I mean, I'm not going to see any of this stuff if I'm drunk and high and negative and angry and bitter.
Or you're missing life when you are. And it's funny. Some people will say, well, why do you raise money, to help those struggling when, how many times does it take to go through rehab before they're well? And I'm like, the problem is I see recovery is possible. I see it every single day. I work with people
Yeah.
in recovery every single day that are contributing members of society and coming out on the other side. So I know it's possible. I work with them all the time. And you can't be naive to believe that not everyone gets well. A lot of people get well. A lot of people don't, but a lot of people still do. And that's really the
And
mission.
it's naive for people. It's naive to think that recovery is like a day where you're not recovered and the day you're recovered.
I know.
It's a process. It's a
Not a pill you take
lifestyle. It's
overnight.
every freaking day.
You work at
What's
it.
that?
It's not a pill you take
Yeah. I
over.
mean, everyone's like, well, yeah, that's why they call it in recovery.
Right. You're in recovery. You're working on it every single day of your life.
You're never out of it.
No.
You're never out of it.
Yeah.
So, well, listen, Jill, it's been a fast hour. Really appreciate your insight. I do want to reach out to you and talk to you about some projects that I'm working on here in Cedar Rapids and some exciting things that we're going to be initiating that I'd love to get your input and get your your wisdom and expertise.
Sure, I would love it. I love to partner with people. I love it. We're on the same path, my friend.
How do people reach you?
So you can follow us on social media to End the Stigma, and it's the number 2. People realize that the 2 symbolizes Scott and I, my twin brother. So to End the Stigma. So we're on Instagram, Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn, Jill Cichowicz. So you can, if you can't find that, you can Google Night for Scott, and you'll find me pretty quickly.
Cichowicz.
Yes, it's a hard one.
Well, it's because it's on the screen. That's the only reason I know how to spell it.
That's exactly. But it is a hard one.
Well, here's to Scott, here's to Seth, here's to Prudence, here's to all the people that we care about that are no longer here, but they're here.
Absolutely.
And let's keep our advocacy, and purpose becomes passion when it gets personal. So thanks for being on the show.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it.